right, let's do it. And welcome back to season 2. I think this is episode 5, correct me if I'm wrong, of the Bottomless podcast. That is spelled BTTMLESS podcast. And we are normally 3 brown friends who just do a podcast in our waning 20s about shit that we find interesting. But we have a special guest today, and I'm super excited. So let's get right into introductions. I'll go first, and then we'll jump to the other 2 other normal brown people we usually have, and then we'll get into our special exciting guest. So my name is Kevin, and one of y'all other brown ones, go ahead.
Vincent.
Leslie and Vincent.
Yeah, and then I reside in Floribama. I call Floribama home. Leslie calls Hawaii home. Vince calls Los Angeles home. And then to our guest,
Jess, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm Jessie.
Amateur hour.
I live in Iowa City. I don't know if I would call that home. But
what's your name?
My
name's Jessie Kraemer.
Jessie Kraemer. What's your Instagram
at J Kraemer?
At J Kraemer.
And what's your sign?
On Jessie as soon as she comes
what's
home.
your sign?
I'm a Pisces. It was just
interesting how you're
birthday.
sexualizing male affection, Leslie.
Yeah,
interesting.
Leslie, I'm not sure if you know, people actually watch us. So I'm like trying to bring attention to Jessie.
No,
I have her Insta.
We're out of control.
Yes, everybody should follow Jessie.
Jesse's like, I should have never done this. Jesse's like, what did I say?
She regrets everything.
She's like, Leslie, why did you, the fuck are these 2 bozos?
You do so much worse, so she's fine. Her Instagram is the letter J, and then KRAEM. Follow her for some of her art. And as my intro to Jessie Kraemer, I was trying to think of just a short little nice way to introduce her. And one thing I thought of that covers a lot of territory is that Jessie is someone who has taught me like indescribable amounts about what it can mean and look like to move through the world in a truly generous and kind way. And I'm lucky enough to be besties with Jessie. And so when I say that, it's like at all levels, like literally at the worst of the worst, knowing Jessie has truly like taught me in the way like you can't learn from any other way than being in somebody's presence who like prioritizes that in their life. So that covers a lot. And then she happens to be really talented in several mediums. And so she's able to spread that out through those, which include writing and acting and drawing. And today we are going to, in total common sense with the theme of our season being shitting all over words all the time and saying how they're not the language of thought, we're going to talk about writing because it actually happens to be the case that all of us do enjoy writing. For Jessie, she's getting an MFA in nonfiction writing at U of Iowa, which some of you may know from the famous Iowa Writers Workshop.
Come on with that. And I will say, for my introduction of Jessie.
Oh, shit.
Please, no, actually, both of you should give your impressions of her that you've had, because this is the first time we're all meeting.
No, I did my Googles. So I had an officer background checker. So when we first started this podcast and we would do, no shit you, like several 8-hour weekly sessions.
Before we started recording?
Yeah. So before first episode hit, we're doing like several weeks of like 8-hour just connecting, seeing the chemistry, figuring out what direction, everything down from title of the podcast and 70 to 80% of the time, the word Jessie would come out of Leslie's mouth in her vernacular. And I was like, and then she would just send us her information, her Instagram, the history, the pods, like all this stuff. So I was like, oh shit. Like it's kind of what I do with very few and far in between people in my life. Like I reference certain people. So it let me know early on how important, like Leslie has a lot of friends and none of them got mentioned except Jessie. So I was like, well, I said, yep, Jessie, there's a totem pole and Jessie's at the top.
I have a lot of friends.
Jesse's at the top
You
of
have
the
a
totem
million
pole.
friends.
So if you're listening to this and you're Leslie's friend, you never came up in a conversation.
Oh,
but Jessie,
there might be one more, so I'm not gonna say who it was. So all of Leslie's friends listening,
Oh.
you're gonna think it might be you, but
I don't know their Insta, I don't know
Yeah.
their name, I don't know nothing. But Jessie, I know everything.
Yeah. Leslie, literally, I do the same to you. Everyone knows you. very
All right,
well.
let's not turn this podcast into this.
There had to be some kind of reciprocity. Like I had to speak back to this. And also you taught me to be generous. So I don't know what you're talking about.
That's amazing.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Vincent, what do you have to say about Jessie before we dive in?
Seems cool.
Nice.
Fair. I appreciate honesty.
I don't know. Well, because I've probably heard of Jessie for a little bit longer, just in the background of Leslie and Virginia and life. But we still have never actually interacted for real. So this will be fun. I have creepishly sat in on several IG lives that Jessie was a part of. So I've stalked, but I haven't engaged. And today we're going to engage.
Ditto, same with both of you.
Amazing. So did all of you guys read the carefully prepared notes for this episode?
Yes.
Yeah.
So then it's not coming as a total surprise that I'm thinking for our introduction, I wanted to ask Jessie if you'd be willing to read us an excerpt from an essay you're working on that hasn't been released yet.
For sure. Yeah, so I actually wrote this thing. Gosh. Yeah, I wrote this thing that's kind of like a prose poem that I can read. It's about the wandering albatross. Leslie, have you heard this one before?
Ooh, I don't know if I've heard this one.
No, I think you read it and you were like, this needs some editing. So
Wow. Damn.
you're like, I don't think it's quite there. Anyway.
How recently was this written?
Well, like a year, maybe. I've been working on it, so hopefully you'll like it better.
Okay.
No.
Well, hopefully I will, because I'll
Yeah.
say so if not.
I know. Anyway, so this is kind of awkward, but yeah, sure, I can read something. This is called The Calculations Involved in Disappearing Over the Pacific. And it's, I don't know, I would call it an essay, but I guess it could also be a poem. Okay, are we good? Only in upward flight and never while gliding down, an albatross sleeps 10 seconds at a time. In bursts, in slips of daydream, against the open sky and circling the world in 46 days, they sleep only 45 minutes in any 24-hour cycle. Like the planes that are not much bigger, little hoppers with little people inside, blue maybe like the sky and cloudy white in their jumpsuits, drinking chill coffee that has not been warm since the morning, since the drip in the kitchen. The 3.5 meters of their wingspan feathering on the updraft, what's inside a pillow, means 34 hours of sleep in 10-second bursts to circle the globe, to tie it in a bow with big fingers. Wings that are 3.5 meters wide means 46 days and Amelia Earhart lost somewhere. And if we were talking about what doesn't get done when something else is happening, what is lost when one is above the ocean and in the sky and skirting clouds like the finger in a bowl of meringue, and each of these clouds whipped tenderly by organic design into peaks and unique and not by a bakery, and a cloud cannot be bought or sold. What is lost is the doing of anything on the ground. What is lost is, with a 3.5 meter wingspan, the parallel bird, the mate who for life will be again by your nest, will be in the 100 or so days a year when one is not flying, subject to some greater gravity, webbed feet grounded and not rippled by air, their delicate interskin, and maybe like the bird, like anything that has gone long enough to forget and reimagine just with pieces, like we do of our parents when we are with the crayons at the desk, like we do with Amelia, who is more now a cap and a scarf than an imperative, who is more now an imperative than a person, who is more a span of time in which we can rest easily and think aggressively without concluding, the open jar without the lid. Like the 24 hours in a day that we might be otherwise doing, it is easier to circle the world than to nest again on the rock on which we have been known to nest. Because when we meet again, it will be to take turns sitting on the egg. And when one of us sits on the egg, the other will fly to the feeding grounds. And the feeding grounds, in terms of time and distance, are 1,300 miles away. And it will take you 2 weeks of sleeping in 10-second bursts and angling upward to return again. And once you return, I will leave for the feeding grounds. And in this way, it will be possible to meet the sky in the emptiness of no confrontation, just with myself again, and to feel that this is the way I am built, the blue and the blue of the water, the space never begging to be moved through, the space curling out like a lime. That's that.
Jessie got words. Jessie got words.
I was stumbling a little bit. It's been a while since I've read anything aloud. I don't know. I wrote that for class. I think it was like an exercise where we had to write really long sentences. I was in a class called The Sentence, which is really fun.
That was a good one. All the classes Jessie's taken, I've also taken because we talk so much. That was such a good class.
Sometimes, I don't know if this is legal, but sometimes Leslie and I will be co-working and I'll be in class and she'll be like, can I stay on? I'll be like, okay.
Wait, I kind of love
getting
that.
like a free education.
Yeah.
She'll be like, I really like what Joe said about metaphor. I'm like, yeah.
Okay.
Cut that out. Cut that out.
Oh my God.
Well, I could say a lot to react to your writing, but I'd love to hear, like, I don't know, I kind of wanted some space to just react to writing, you know, the way that we would about anything else we read. But obviously with you being our guest, like Kevin and Vincent, any organic reaction?
Vince, I'm gonna talk too much, so you go.
You can talk too much. One thing I would say is that I have a harder time reacting to things that are spoken to me as opposed to me reading it myself. So it takes me a little bit to get some sort of response that isn't just like,
I really
it's not because there's not a response, but it just takes it a while to digest in my little brain.
So Vince, I hate you so much. First thoughts and reactions, like as a poet, like I'm so programmed to write a certain way, whether intentional, whether based on who I studied. And one thing that I've a muscle that I've exercised as of late is long form monologue poems that have no rhyming. The intentionality behind it is not to write. It's to like, I think there's this tool to be exercised in which, okay, like rhyming for me can be a cheap way to accomplish the facade of what could be considered poetry. If someone's not really technically trained in the art of like writing poetry, then you can just rhyme cute words in it. So like with you reading it out, when you said like, I kind of consider it a poem, but it's like I was like, okay, listen to me. So I started listening. I totally, as a poet, I totally understand, like I like energy wise, and then just like sentiment, I was like, oh shit, like she's the real deal. Like I've read a lot of poetry. I've had people share with me their poetry. I've had people try to like tell me they were a poet, and like I'm the person who like will see someone who's not a poet, or someone who doesn't consider someone who's not a poet, someone who doesn't consider themselves a poet, and they'll say something, and I'll be like a normal person on Twitter or in real life or in a movie or in a book will say something, and I'll think to myself, that's the most poetic line I've ever heard in my entire life. So like there's this sentiment, this energy. So as you were reading, I was like, oh shit, she actually is a poet. Like there stylistically, there is a tool she's wielding and a muscle she's exercising, that this isn't like, I don't know if you like sometimes you can just start writing and it's like a flow of energy, and sometimes you can sit down to intentionally sculpt out a certain monologue or way you want to write. So I'm not sure if it was intentional on your part or if you just free flowed it, but it felt like even the patterning of linear, in a linear sense, you built an image, right? Like you would talk about the traveling of this albatross from one point to the next, and then returning, and then the mate goes, and then there's there's a very linear and structural and systematic building to it. And for me, one of the things I think, it's funny, we talked about story last week. One of the things I think is important for me when I write a narrative poem is I want to take you from point A to point B. So sometimes I'll sit down and write a poem, and it's almost like if I took you literally from one physical location to the next location by the end of the poem, and I do it through a series of steps. So as you were saying it, and like not even in just the linearity of how you built it out, but then like the way you're lacing in, it felt very effortless. But I know when from writing, like, oh shit, like she does this. She really, really has this muscle and this tool, and she's owned and sharpened this tool of writing in that way. And it shows in the fact that as the listener, there wasn't a single point, and at least for me, that I got lost. And that's very difficult to make something feel so sentimental, to have to put a human sentiment and emotion behind a thing that is not a human, to like the Pixar thing we were talking about off pod, to do all these different things. So I'm feeling human emotion about a bird. I'm seeing the linearity. I never got lost at one point. And what is she talking? She goes from this albatross to Amelia Earhart and explaining how Amelia went from these things, like these ideas, to the space and time, to and how we like dehumanized it into this moment and all these scarves. And it's like, oh shit, she's like, and it doesn't ever feel like an overexertion of rhyme or metaphor or simile or symbology or persona. It's like it feels like when Leslie says words aren't the language of thought, it's really hard. Sometimes you have this image in your head and you're trying with as much fidelity as possible. You're trying to put the image onto the big screen. You're trying to make a panoramic image of what's in your head. And so the shit was just beautiful because like, as you were talking, I was like, oh shit, this feels like a high fidelity image that I'm seeing. Like this feels like a very, very high fidelity, high definition image. And at one point, never did I get lost in that. And anyway, there's all these really, really important elements to me in terms of the arts and the mastery and the skillfulness of writing what I would consider a poem. And so wrapped up just in that one piece was so many displays of like, there's several skill sets you demonstrated in that. And but at the end of it, you wouldn't, if someone who's not a poet might not know all the shit that I know it would take for someone to sit down and have to sculpt that fine of a detail and accomplish that level of a feat with the writing. So like fucking beautiful, like fucking incredible. Like shit was beautiful. Thank you.
I love the polar opposite of Kevin and Vincent's reactions.
It takes me a while to
both
read.
No, honestly, it's really hard for me to focus when things are read out loud too. So, like,
Yeah, often same.
To respond, give you some kind of response. I think my response is a bit different in that when I'm listening to stuff like this, I'm more so seeing like what you said provoke something in my mind, and where do I sit most of the time while I'm listening, because usually, especially if I'm listening, I'm not reading it. I'm not actually listening to every word you say. If you provoke me, I get stuck somewhere. And I was kind of stuck 3 times. I just responding to how it hit me, but the blueness of the sky, and then you kind of described like sitting on a perch, so being grounded, and then you went back to like the blueness of the ocean. And I think just that feeling of vastness in the blue, if that makes sense. And maybe it was the way you were reading it. I don't know. It just really put my mind there. You have a very good reading voice.
Not you hitting on Jessie.
Not you.
You know what I'm saying?
On
You know what I'm saying? But I guess not to turn into a question, what was the through line of starting with like the blueness of the sky and then coming back to the blueness of the ocean? Because that definitely stuck out to me.
yeah, definitely. I think I just remember writing this in a coffee shop, and like I just needed something to write about. Oh, I think the prompt was like procrastination or something. And I was like, well, I don't really want to write about that. So I don't know. I was like procrastinating writing this thing. And I just started looking up birds, and I found the albatross, which is like just such an incredible, like they can just fly for hundreds of days at a time, which is ridiculous. And I was like, well, how did they sleep? And so I was just thinking about like this enormous bird, like sleeping for like 10 seconds at a time and then like continuing to fly. But then
Do they fall while they're dozing in?
Like they sleep in 10-second bursts, but only when they're flying up.
Holy
like,
shit.
Anyway, but yeah, I guess Kevin, when you were talking about rhyme, and then I was thinking like, oh yeah, poems are easier to listen to. They're more like sonic and like oral when there's like a rhyme that you can like hold on to. Like sonic clues like that are helpful when things are read aloud, because then you have like a little like foothold and like a place to rest your brain a little bit. But I guess the way that I move through things is often like association, like how I get to from A to B or from like A to negative A. It's like through association. So kind of like the rhyming of like the same word repeated, or the rhyming of like, yeah.
No,
just,
that's
like, associations.
that's very like, listen, like I as a writer and as someone who used to write like songwrite, rap music, now poetry, spoken word, and paying attention, like writing a poem for the intention of it having to be listened to, like what you just did was a oral presentation. Like, so like, as opposed to reading it where the reader, the audience can go back and reread the line before. If you're listening to something, you have to, there's almost, especially if the person isn't going to be able to reconsume that piece of content, you have there. For me, as someone who like is conscious about open mic performances, I have to be conscious about the idea of, I want the audience member to catch this as easily as possible, and the whole portrait. Like, so as I was listening, I was like, oh shit, like, so like I'm gonna try to give a very crude example. You would say maybe one line had 7 words, and then like you said, the association, the last 2 words of the 7 would reconnect to the first 2 of the 8th line, and there was a pattern there of the you're again, so you're not using that tool of rhyme, which is such an it's the way someone
it's like repelling or something.
Exactly. And so there's this and so as a poet, I felt that rhythm and that harmony of like, oh shit, this is a very intelligent, very subtle way, a very discreet way of accomplishing what rhyme usually accomplishes by giving someone a foothold to know where to keep climbing up this mountain. She's doing something that you'd have to pay attention and know what she's doing, and probably be a writer or be someone who like storytells in creative ways to know what she's doing here. Because if you're not paying attention to that detail and that depth, you don't realize she's carrying you through this poem, and you probably just think your mind is that sophisticated and sharp to follow along. And it's like, no. She intentionally built into this piece a helping of you to get up this mountain. Like, it's not like you're just so that funny. So what?
I think when I write, it's like not intentional. I let the like intentional of like whatever associations my brain is making that I think are smarter than me, like carry me through. So I feel like I'm not even, you know what I mean? It's like,
you know what I think that is combining what Kevin said and what Jessie said is what I was saying about how I've learned about generosity through Jessie just existing and knowing her so well, because I think you're so wired to be generous in the sense of helping others along, like whatever areas you might have a little more knowledge on, that like your way of thinking is very helpful. And I think that you naturally integrate, how can I not just think this for me, but how can I think it in a way that will carry others along too from areas they could benefit? Honestly, I think if that's not all of it, I think that's a big part of it, why you write the way you do.
I have a question because Jessie just said something and it made me wonder. So you said sometimes you'll try, it's not an intentional thing. Your brain will write in ways that you know is smarter. Like your brain is smarter than you. So you'll let it go into places that, like, instead of you intentionally trying to build out something, you'll just let it do what it does. When you write sometimes, or even with that piece right there, what some artists might call the flow state, what I call like, there's an entity or like, I don't consider myself to write poetry. I say there is a spirit or an entity inside of me, and that's the poet. And when that thing comes out, my conscious brain clicks off, and he whatever it is just completely flows out all this shit. So when you write, is sometimes, like, and with that piece specifically, or just in general, is there ever that feeling and that sensation of like, you'll sit down, write a piece, and you'll kind of look up and go, what the fuck just happened? Like, I can't just sit down and do that all the time whenever I want, if ever I want. Like, that was a very almost surreal experience, out of body. Something came in, something started writing through me. It was like inspiration and creative energy flowing through me, and I just got to be like a vessel for this thing.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I get into flow states. Probably with that one, I did get into a flow state. And I mean, guess to go back to Vince's question about like the blue and the image, I started writing about this bird, and then it's like, I don't know, if I like misdirect some kind of focus, or like, it's like occupying a child. Like there's some part of me, there's some like conscious part of me that needs to be consumed by something. If I like give the child the bird, then like all the other art making can like happen through this metaphor. So like obviously I was trying to say something about the relationship I was in, which like ended up happening through all of this, but I like needed to give the child something to play with, which was the ideas and the facts, and the like obsession of this bird. And then like, however, and I guess this is just one way of approaching things sometimes, because sometimes I do come into a piece and I'm like, I have something to say. Like, this isn't a poem, this is like an essay, or like a critique, or like a narrative. But I guess for work that's more poetic, if I can occupy my mind with something, or just give some kind of raw material, then like the story I need to tell, or like what is in me to be told, like will happen, not through the content. Like I feel like I'm a very much like form or like movement over content kind of person. Like I could throw anything into the wind, and then it's like how the wind moves,
Crazy.
the content will be. Yeah, like honestly, sometimes if I'm like, I need to write something, I feel something in me needs to come out. It's like I could start writing about anything. And then it's kind of like the topography of what happens, not necessarily the landscape. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that is, yeah, that is again, it speaks to my response of like you have a certain level of, or even if there's this flow thing, whatever it is in you that is able to create these things, there's a certain level of skillful mastery over it. Because that is very, like when you said, I was like, she's right. And it's a very, you have to spend enough time in poetry to know, for someone to say, throw me any content. You can put a cover over the content and give it to me last minute. My form is my grasp of form, my exercise of my utilizing of form is enough so that you could literally, it could be a bird, it could be chapstick, it could be a metaphorical idea of wind or energy, and you throw it into the form, and then out comes this, like there's a very high level of skill. And like I'm sitting here like geeking the fuck out because I'm like, this, like for someone who has a high enough caliber of artistic expression in a spoken format and in a written format that can be translated into spoken as you, for me, it's very rare that I sit sometimes in awe of someone's skill set that I go, holy shit, like they're actually very gifted. Like they're not just skilled and like they trained, they're gifted in that I feel like they were endued with something outside of themselves. So I'm kind of just geeking out. Like I feel like I want to say more shit, but I'm eating up our time. So I'm gonna let Leslie move on.
Leslie's
This
just
whole
eating
pod is
shit.
just be us gassing Jesse up. We came
Yeah,
here just to know that
this
we're
is
your
just
biggest
therapy.
stands.
Thanks. Also, Leslie, what you said about generosity of, I don't know, that was really helpful. I guess sometimes, writing such like a solitary thing, and it can seem like, especially if you're writing nonfiction and working with like self-story or like your own voice, it can be like, oh, is this just like solipsistic, or is this like it's really insular, or is this like giving anything? What is this like really like looking into a mirror? And what you offered about like the way of thinking being generous or like being an offering, I think I really do think about it that way, even though it's something that happens alone. That'll carry me through the rest of this degree, the last year and a half of this degree, that I was beginning to think was maybe like
Meta for the pod. I feel like we have very clear themes this season. I don't know if we had clear themes the first season, which I think is kind of cool. But it's not necessarily related to this. But the thoughts are the language of thought has come up, or the words aren't the language of thought has come up every episode. And then also what is now like actualized into like the flow state versus like Kevin has a different conception, but we've actually kind of circled that same kind of thought several times in regards to love, in regards to like the shadow conversation. And now I just think it's interesting to see those themes surface so explicitly this time around.
It seems like the language thing and this conscious mind thing seem very related, because like conscious mind seems like internal monologue. It's like naming and narrativizing. I think you guys are like talking about the same thing. There's like this controlling like conscious mind thing that perceives itself as being in control because it's like naming things, but it's actually not. And there's so many different parts of the self and identity and so many different agents, but it's more difficult to point to them because maybe we live in a world where this narrativizing is, and language.
If you would listen to our story episode,
Well,
you would know that we talked about this.
I'm so sorry. Maybe
okay. In response,
I think that was a beautiful outside looking and analyzing it. So thank you for that contribution, Jesse.
Yes, Jesse, thank you.
I can leave.
Leslie being rude. I'll kick Leslie out. I'm the host. I'll kick Leslie out of the meeting.
Okay. So just to follow up on what did I miss something? Also, it has to be said, I'm pretty sure my ears have significantly deteriorated. So I'm pretty sure sometimes I literally don't hear when someone's trying to pipe in. It's a real thing. I need to go to the doctor. So please, if you start to say something and I barrel over you, say it again louder because I'm not meaning to.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
No, I've cut you off like 7 times this episode, so it's all you.
You've actually been talking this entire time. Well, okay, 2 quick things. First of all, in a really cool coincidence, somebody recommended a book to me called Thinking Fast and Slow. Yeah, and it's all about basically this guy who won the Nobel Prize in something. He's really smart. And he has done a lot of research on what he calls system 1 and system 2 thinking. Why is everyone looking like they're laughing at some joke I'm not a part of?
I don't know. You're just
Everyone's,
like
grinning.
You
trying to
made
sell
the
a
joke.
book right now.
I was laughing at the joke that you made, Leslie.
Did I make a joke?
You're like Nobel Prize for something. He's smart.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That's literally was not a joke. It's just because I didn't remember. But anyway, yeah. So he writes about system 1 versus system 2 thinking, with system 1 being the part that is more what we would probably call like intuition, and it's the part that we use for automatic reactions. Like it doesn't really take conscious effort to shape the thought to be useful or the action or whatever. So like if you see 2 plus 2, you cannot help knowing that the answer is 4. If you've had any form of education, like you exert no mental effort to know that. Whereas if I ask you to tell me like 27 times 54, that would activate your system 2 thinking. It's like short versus long form thinking. And he writes about the state of flow in a way that really mirrors what Jessie was saying about having a need to occupy the child basically in order to access a state. So what he says is the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi,
Nailed it.
sorry dude, sorry about has done more than anyone else to study this state of effortless attending, and the name he proposed for it, flow, has become part of the language. People who experience flow describe it as a state of effortless concentration so deep that they lose their sense of time, of themselves, of their problems. And their descriptions of the joy of that state are so compelling that that dude has has called it an optimal experience.
Yeah.
Many activities can induce a sense of flow, from painting to racing motorcycles, blah, blah, blah. Flow neatly separates the 2 forms of effort: concentration on the task and the deliberate control of attention. Riding a motorcycle at 150 miles per hour and playing a competitive game of chess are certainly very effortful. In a state of flow, however, maintaining focused attention on these absorbing activities requires no exertion of self-control, thereby freeing resources to be directed to the task at hand. Yeah.
So good. It reminds me of being on stage too, like the flow state of being like acting. Yeah, but nice with the Daniel Kahneman.
Go
Leslie.
there. I want to hear it. All relates.
Oh, I guess I just think about how, oh man, like when an actor is really trying to control things and is like really in their head, you call it like being in your head. I used to get this note all the time, which is maybe why I'm a writer now, not an actor. But like Jessie, like you're so in your head. JK. And it's like you can tell when someone's like making decisions or like, you know, trying to like control. But when someone's in the moment and responding to what they're given and being driven by impulse, yeah, there's like this flow state that is utterly engaging. And when someone else is engaged on stage and in a flow state, it's like impossible not to be hypnotized by that. And I think the same is true for writing. Like if you're interested in writing something, if you were engaged while you were writing it, it's more likely that the reader will be engaged when they're reading it. And sometimes there's like a belabored nature of writing, or like a you know, like not that writing, I mean, also when we were talking before about flow, it did bring up for me that there's a difference between writing and editing. So it's like write drunk, edit sober. So like write and flow, like when you're editing, you'll probably like there's a different kind of attention that's needed there, and you need to be thinking structurally and thinking about communicating, like how is best to communicate. It's more the act of being a mechanic.
Mm-hmm. And there's a weird prioritization of what comes out of the controlled, like products that come from a more controlled state, right? Like we tend to think of impulse as like our lower selves, right? Like, oh, well, that was like me not operating from a state of conscious. And I just think like I understand why that happens, but I think that back to Vincent's point of us having a theme, at least for me, one of the themes informing why I'm so meditating on this idea about what really can it look like to, instead of treating the translation of whatever the true nature of how each person thinks into words. Wow, this sentence is so garbled. Let me start over. People have a way that they think. I think some people tend to think innately in a way that maybe easier translates into words, or they've developed the skill to more quickly at each stage of the thought process put it into words. That way the translation along the line can stay fairly true to form. Because if you think about it, if your base way of thinking doesn't naturally lend itself to words, like for me, I've been thinking about this a lot. I really do think I primarily think in like picture concepts, which is why like so often when I'm trying to think through something, it's not even just pictures, it's picture concepts. So like I'll literally draw a box and just like stare at the box and project, because I don't want to draw. They're not just pictures. It's like I need just to feel like I have a space to hold this way. And if you think about it, if I go 10 steps down of considering something, unless I do the work to translate the first picture concept into words that does a decent job, like then when I get to the second level, if I haven't done that translation, then it's like a doubly removed. If I try to, if I try to translate 2 boxes in without ever having translated the first box, and then if I try to translate it once I'm 10 in, well, because we prioritize.
Sweet.
Who's
we prioritizing?
I fuck with Jessie. Oh my God, I fuck with Jessie.
Well, that's kind of the question, right? Like that's what we're talking about with writing. So that perfectly why translate? So
okay. No, yeah, I think that's so vital. I've been thinking about this a lot now that we're in this digital world wherein like a lot of my communication with people is like talking, like, okay, we're messaging, okay, we're taking a walk and talking.
COVID, you mean?
Yeah, because of COVID, like we can sit down 6 feet apart from each other and like look into each other's eyes, which I would like maybe rather do sometimes than like walk around town for 10 miles and like talk a bunch, which I love doing also. Like words are absolutely my jam, like the language of thought. Like let's do that. But there are so many other ways.
You feel like words are close to your language of thought?
What?
Or you just feel like you've developed a skill set where you can quickly translate
I can play with them. It's just like it's like another faucet. Like there are like a lot of different ways this can come out. Yeah. Definitely. It's like all the same stuff. It can come out in a lot of different ways. But yeah, like drawing. So like drawing is another faucet. And then like of communication, I guess, I don't know. And there's the question of like expression, like self-expression, and then like expression that's meant to communicate, and like audience, and the way that, but like, yeah, it's like not just words. It's not just written words. There's a difference between the written word and the spoken word. There's a difference between like image, like purely communicating in image. There's a difference like only communicating in physical touch. There's like a difference.
Okay, sorry to cut you off, but not sorry. Okay, that brings up something. How do we feel about this as four of us? Something I've been thinking about. Is this true? Yeah, image. I think, and maybe it's I have some damage or something, or I've misconstrued society's vibes, but I have this feeling like, okay, so if you took in a painting and the artist said, I made this painting because it's something that couldn't be put into words, would most people read that painting as a way to, as opposed to recognizing that the image is more close to the way of the artist's true thing than the words that we would use to describe and interpret the painting? like
They're
doesn't
your- yeah.
unconsciously for most people the spoken, once we put words on the spoken interpretation of the painting, that is a translation into a foreign tongue.
Mhm.
That's the truth, rather than I think what in society we tend to treat it, which is that the painting is a translation. It's like, well, because you couldn't put it into words, you're translating into this like less clear form, or this form that is an alternative to what would really be.
Yeah.
Isn't
You're
that
already
basically how we treat it?
prioritizing. Yeah, it's already like prioritizing or like making a second string of image
A
as
little,
opposed to
because
words.
words allow us to, I think, be a little more logical. Like we can fuck around with them, which I always like to do, and try and force it into you're forced to interpret it in a more intuitive state. But like, isn't that true? That for the average being, it's like you unconsciously think of, well, because I couldn't put it into words, I made this image, as opposed to like, wait, the
Well,
image.
would a painter say that?
Well, not a painter. The average way that we tend to treat images, like in society, like for consumption, like it's like you don't usually treat it's always like, well, what can I say about this painting, or what can I discuss, which I enjoy.
Yeah.
But we don't recognize that that is actually like translating it into a foreign language, as opposed to we treat it as, oh, well, let's try and get this into a language that we can all actually
Yeah.
hold on a weight,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, we could all just look at the painting together, or like watch the movie. We don't have to
Exactly.
talk about it afterwards. Yeah, and I think about that even with writing. Like talking about writing is already translating an experience, because the act of reading is experiential.
Ooh,
And
and we
then-
also talked about this last week. If you're
I'm sorry.
roll-
Don't have the
roll-
time. I was
That's the
writing
last
so
straw.
much.
I'm kicking Leslie out. That's
Wait,
the last straw.
this started with so much love. Now there's beef. This has been actually a
No, our
nice little
love
roller
is
coaster.
beef.
Leslie woke up and chose violence this morning. I swear
Because
to
I
God.
couldn't say it in
Violence.
love, I'm saying it in beef. Sorry. No, but yeah, like I don't know, I like teach literature to undergrads. And sometimes I just want to be like, no, like we all read the book, right? Like we don't need to talk about it.
Oh my God.
Like, we just read the book, like you got what you needed to out of it, which is not true, because they need to
And I
learn how
think
to
what
read.
we're talking about is a reaction. It's not that these discussions aren't useful, because they obviously are. It's just a reaction against the fact of how far it's been pushed. Like, I just wish that the wait for the perspective Jessie just said of like, do we really always need to talk about it? What would it look like to all watch a movie and then like sit in that space and like, I don't know, just
Well, it's
not
like dancing
immediate-
together. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to
Mm.
talk about what it was like to dance together.
Well, that's so true.
Mm.
Mhm. Like it's so understood, but and not that we do that anymore, but like, you know what I mean? There are certain things that we don't feel the need to translate as much. Or like,
I feel like I
don't know,
definitely can
sex
think
or
of a
something.
couple times where I'm like responding to well, I can remember one specific time I was responding to FK Twig's Sad Days music video, which I will repeat was the music video of 2020. But I was responding very much with just like how I feel. And it felt like not real good translation, but just like it pressed me certain way. So very much mood, which you know I love a good mood. And I remember the response was not, it wasn't like a bad response, but it was very like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I feel like that's kind of what Leslie was like getting at. I feel like it's so uncommon that it's a muscle that isn't really used, just responding, but like trying to like create some coherent word-based explanation, which means that because that's not common, I'm definitely not secure in responding in that way and sitting in that. And then I don't know, it's like a cycle, right? Like I don't know, do you feel like can you think of a time where you are responding to like a painting or just any piece of medium or any piece of media where you're able to like digest it with your friends? Maybe this is a bad question because you both went to art school, so I'm sure the answer is yes. But I can't think of a time where I've really digested this stuff without having to like really translate it, like be forced to speak to specifically what I liked, what I didn't like, or like what it meant or whatever the conversation had to be.
Well, I think it's strange because there's this like are we on the same page kind of thing going on. I think maybe it's easier when you've had an experience that is understood to be mutual. I kind of don't know what I'm saying, but like but even there's not even the guarantee that everyone will be understood when you're using words, but there's like this, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know. I feel like I've just had experiences where, you know, you have an experience and it was like so impactful, like whether it was an art or like, oh man, like when we were at the protests and someone drove a car into the crowd, and it's like all of a sudden like we're all like on the same page, and it's like we don't need to talk about that. Like we never need to talk about that. We're not going to like debrief about it in language. It's like it was so felt. It's like I can look at you and know, like, you know.
Yes. God. I do think that's probably a base often requirement of like when it's easier to process with other people without words, when it's like an obvious mutual. A friend shared an experience where he and a friend tried to swim across a river and they almost died. Basically, they almost drowned. And he said how like when they finally made it to the other side, they sat there, they didn't talk about it, and they made their way back to their homes, and they didn't talk about it for several years after the fact. Like it was like it would have been like offensive to try and like put words on you know what I mean? Like it didn't need to, because I was obviously on the same page. They obviously both just almost died and then like made it through together. So yeah.
Yeah, and something's like in you and is seen and has been communicated and like witnessed.
And you
and
recognize that it would not only be unnecessary, it would almost be sacrilegious to try.
Well, it would be translating in the wrong direction.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be making nothing out of something. It would be complicating.
It just exactly, and diverting. And I think that the main thing is wanting to carve out more space in daily consciousness and in society for that even being a possibility. Not saying suddenly fuck words. Obviously, like words are the most useful, I think, tool we can use for like communication in a way that can lead to progress in different areas, I think, right? Because it is, as of right now, well, I might be wrong, but as of right now, it seems like often it's just that space for that other way isn't even given. You know, it's like,
well, it's like the language of law and the language of, but even that is so fucked. Like there's lawyers, I don't know, it's like weird. The language of law is also a certain kind of like strange poetry in that it's like establishing rules and breaking them. And I don't know, it's like, I guess I'd never made that connection before, but something I think about poetry is at war with language in a way. It's trying to get beside or like circumscribe language or like use these tools that do like can be used logically, but if you like, I don't know, like strike them together in new ways, like you're creating new like new rules that emit new language, like you're reorganizing things. But then it's like, I don't know, the strange like gamified language of like bureaucracy and law. It's like the same thing. It's just like poetry, but to a different end. Like kind of pretending to be so certain and
you're right.
Then still there's
but
ways
I don't know
to
what
bend.
else we could use if not the. I wonder if it is the same as what you were saying, as like you could almost put anything in there.
Well, is the problem the language, or is the problem like the people and the ideas and like what's trying to be done? I don't know. Like, is the problem because of the language, or is like, do we get blocked up and in knots because of the bureaucracy of the language? Or then there's also like people who are doing all of these things too. Like it's a type of communication and there are certain problems with the communication, but there's, now we're talking about something else, but you know what I mean? Like if we were just gazing deeply into each other's eyes, would the language of the bureaucrats still be oppressive?
I think like some people could do that, but as for societal organization, I don't think.
No, I'm saying like probably if a politician was like using like a gaze, it would still be bureaucratic.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah. I mean, so how do you choose? Oh, go ahead, Vincent.
It was a question kind of following up because you mentioned like saying like law is like poetry, but to the goal of like certainty, like language to the goal of certainty. And I feel like my only engagement with writing is to the destination of certainty. Like for me, it's just how it's a good way for me of trying to process what's in my brain. So do you feel like what was my question? Where was I going with this? I don't know if that's me just being too right side of the brain, but do you ever write for certainty? Is that like not creative writing necessarily, or does that make sense?
I think that's a really important question, and I think it's probably a good misconception to like get rid of, that creative writing does not write towards certainty. Like people are absolutely saying things certainly, like whether certainly through the movement of a narrative, referencing the fiction podcast that I didn't listen to, like whether it's through certainty through lyric, through the poetic, whether it's certainty through like an essay, which can be just so explicit and like this is a critique of this. So no, definitely I think certainty is a goal, a big important thing. I'd say that. I don't know, as opposed to like, I don't know, like an experience or pleasure.
This might
or
be
like
annoying, but to me, it's like Vincent's question. I guess I know what you're asking, but to me, it's like with the conversation of poems and poetic language being at war with language, like 100% agree. But to me, it's like because that feels more certain, like those places that it gets you, when it gets you basically away from words, like
into a gray
I think
area.
the best into what?
Into a gray area that's more truthy.
I wouldn't even call it gray. I think of it as a colorful space. Like it makes more sense to me. It feels more, it's just, so to me, like it feels more certain. But I think what Vincent is saying, which you're talking about certainty in terms of thoughts that could be followed logically via words, right? Yeah. Whereas to me, often that space is actually the space that can feel very confusing and
Well, it can be confusing for something to be certain and also be wrong.
Yeah.
In terms of how precise something feels like it is in terms of language, which is maybe like the language of the law.
The part is like what confuses me so often about logically strung together worded thoughts is the fact that not even just the thought string, but that the fact that it feels like it's being received in the broader society as certain. And that to me is so confusing because it's like, wait, but we know, right? Like it's in this nice package that tends to be read as like, oh, because it follows this form and it's in this medium, it's certain. And those often feel so much less resonantly true to me than other what I would call thought processes that I see through image or through music or through other things. But I don't know how to put that. There's like no shelf for that I can see easily to place on a shelf in relationships and society, without doing a lot of work to build out like, let's learn each other's languages.
Contexts.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe this like aesthetic, like logical language is something that is meant to be true, like regardless of context. So it's kind of like contextless. I don't know, like the language of the dictionary or something, like certainty. But everything really does exist in context. And so that, and
it's interesting. I feel like I'm kind of the opposite, Leslie, what you said, because when you first described that like colorful space or the space of gray, I don't know how I feel about that space still. I think I'm trying to figure out how I feel about that space. That space makes me feel uneasy for whatever reason. Whereas I feel a lot more at ease with like more like explicit, like logical certainty, but I also don't associate that certainty with which I guess is definitionally certainty, but I don't associate it with like some sense of like final certainty. Like to me, it's an art in itself. It's like a sculpture that you like cement and solidify and present, and then someone comes and they sculpt on top of that. But there's still a cemented, like certain piece that you're playing with.
It's like the difference between. Is this going to be another stupid one? Hold on. I feel like what you're saying. Well, first off, I'll just say that I recognize that. And I think that's why, honestly, we've been such good friends for so long. Because I really think in this area, we are quite divergent, Vincent, with what feels most comfortable to us. But because both of us recognize, like you said, like the value in other contexts and don't treat it as the final type of certainty. Because, yeah, I feel more certain in the areas you feel uncomfortable. But my feeling safe, I recognize like other people feel safer in this area and it's equally as valid. And I'm like interested and intrigued that someone can think so differently, you know, and like I learned so much from that. But I was just going to say something about what you're saying feels a bit more like an idea of solid versus watery, like building with solids versus maybe mixing liquids. You know, like you build blocks.
Yes, literally. Yes. I was just reminded of even how I started saying like I can't respond to Jessie reading this out loud because I need to get some solids to build up as opposed to just like being like an open faucet of just
and Kevin
rushing
was like,
out.
"Oh, I've got warm, I've got cold."
Yeah.
What the floodgates?
Which I love and kind of envy in a sense. I wish I was more comfortable just spritzing it out there, but it's just not how my mind processes.
I don't think that spritzing it out there necessarily means stream of consciousness. This is something I thought about with what you said with like, you know, you were like, well, one example I can think of plotless, again, per our story episode that Jessie didn't listen to.
Yo, Leslie
that was your last violation. You are gone. Say goodbye. Say goodbye, Leslie, to the audience.
I love you.
Yeah, so sorry. I'll just like spend time listening to all your podcasts instead of helping you for hours a day on personal and work problems. I'm so sorry. Maybe I'll just
literally so true. But yeah, it's like stream of consciousness is not it either at all, which you looked like you immediately agreed with. Okay, wait, I really wanted to ask this was the first official question in my queue. Since we have 5 minutes left, it seems like the right time to ask. Jessie, how do you choose what you write versus what you draw? Which is, I feel like, very on the nose relating to everything we've been talking about. How do you choose?
Yeah. Well, I think when I have a thought during the day, like I'm just like running around my house, sometimes like a line will come to me or like an idea or an emotion will come to me and I'll be like, oh, like I have to capture that. It's like I'm like, this needs to like come out right now. And the easiest way to do that is to draw it. I think it's like, so if I have something that comes like in a rush like that, I'll get my sketchbook and like just write a few words and then illustrate. Because it feels really immediate and it feels like pretty emotive. Yeah, like maybe just a bit closer to the bone. If I feel like I need to figure something out intellectually or kind of like meditate on something a little longer or go on a bit more of a journey, I'll type something out. But I think in both cases, what I'm doing becomes clear to me as I'm doing it. Like if I'm drawing, the way my hand moves the pen will inform the next move I make. So it's like a conversation between what I intended to draw, because I like do pen and ink drawings. And so like my hand will start moving, but the way the pen meets resistance on the page, the way that my wrist might be shaking, like maybe I just got in from a walk and it was cold, like what I see happening on the page that feels like it wasn't coming from me, like that is kind of incidental, like informs where I go next. There's like a bit of freedom or giving up in that, which also feels maybe similar to writing, because there's so much at play. It's not just like the thought I'm trying to communicate. It's like the sounds I want to move towards, or like what associations come up. And then
What do you mean by sounds you want to move towards?
oh, I feel like sometimes a word will just come to me and I'll be like, I don't even remember what that means, but I feel like I need to write it down.
Got it.
I don't even know if I'm using this word the right way, or I'll just get sucked into the way something sounds and like get set off on a like a tangent that leads to another discovery. And maybe all I'm saying here is the process of making anything like informs what's being made. It's not like I'm like, oh, I know exactly what this is going to look like. It's like the moves when I am in the workshop like dictate, like there's no blueprint. It's like something that is built.
Right. You're not receiving it. You don't get a set of instructions and a manual how to put together an IKEA crib.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, maybe I'm thinking about a baby. And then like, ooh, and then it ends up being like a little treehouse swing, you know? That's what the baby wanted.
Exactly. Do you
Well,
relate?
it is 10:28. Do you still have to go in 2 minutes?
No, we can. I don't have to go. We can go.
Sorry, I feel like I got into a flow state for a second with Leslie, and we just really went to not what was on the prompt. But
No, this is exactly what I wanted to happen, honestly. Was just like
Leslie was
us.
controlling it the whole time. Actually, this was her blueprint. She's
Oh,
like,
you're
you know,
saying it in a good way.
you know what I want to IKEA
Jessie
build?
has a point.
You know what I want to IKEA build? A flow with friendship and association where we're just enjoying each other.
Jessie has
That's
a
my
point.
control.
She
She feels like she's being so flowy, but really she's like dictator of flow.
No one can both roast and love me the way
I know, I love you.
Can. No, this is honestly exactly what I wanted. Should we say another half hour? Is that okay, or 15 minutes? Okay. I mean, that I just figured would spill into talking about writing process for all of us. When, how, why do you write?
Shoot me this one.
Sorry.
And how? Why do you write, Leslie?
Yeah.
Yeah, look of disgust
yeah,
when you were
you
shaking
said-
your head. Why'd you look so disgusted? You're like,
Disgusted.
yeah.
Sorry.
Disgusted by what? Who?
Huh?
Just answer your question.
Oh.
What? How? Why do you write?
Rough. We're going off the rails.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. Somebody else start.
Vince.
That's thinking.
I feel like
What?
I kind of answered it. I feel like mine's the most boring, so I should go first before it gets too flowery.
You always say that about yourself, and I just want you.
And
to
then
realize-
every time,
Oh
and then
my
every
God,
time,
I
wait,
feel
and then
so
every
judged.
time
Vince
I'm
just fucking
proven
called
right.
us flowery.
Every time I'm proven
Okay.
right.
you
Art
need to start
school.
All right.
Flowery with all the good commentations.
I can't hear what anybody's saying right now. Just like I just heard a bunch of noises. My ears are gone and shit. Like it all just.
Jesse,
because you don't have your
Leslie's not
AirPods
even
in.
going to be able to communicate.
Jesse, if you can like say another thing, or if one of y'all can say another thing to where Vince gets so worked up to at the end of his worked up state, he goes, "What's the problem? What's the problem? I'll pay either of you $100."
What's the problem? What's the problem? Wait, do I say what's the problem?
I think
No,
you owe
but-
yourself $100.
What's
No,
up?
but when
How you feel?
But I've seen, but you said you the most worked up you ever got in life. One time you were screaming at your friends at the end. You were like, "What's the problem?" And you felt really shame. I was like, "Huh?" He said that to me once before, and I was like, "I wonder if we can like organically get that out of him." If
Wait,
that's,
what was the context I said it to you? Trust me, this was you would know if I had reached this.
It was either when we were arguing in Fadeville about your vegan things, and you told me to call Charles because I was
Probably.
talking to Charles,
and I told you, and you
or-
still owe me a beer from that conversation.
I do. Or we were in LA. I forgot what we were arguing about, but you've said what's the problem before, and you were like actually screaming. You weren't screaming like mad, but you were screaming. And I was like, oh shit. So when you said that, you said when you said that, you got into a place of shame. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like now I have like Now I know where to like try to coerce him into to try to.
No, you guys will never. I don't want to get.
We only
there.
got like
Season
15
3, we're
minutes.
gonna dedicate one episode each to the other two trying to push the third one to their most.
to their break.
and ruffles.
That's
All right.
That is
Back on track. Back on track. We got Jesse for like 15
Oh
minutes.
yeah. Sorry.
Finish
Yeah. No, I think mine's straightforward in that for me, it's usually a process of creating order in my disorderly brain. So that's why usually I write. And then I think there's another piece of like persuasiveness that I feel like just the way I think, I'm constantly building in how it's received as I'm thinking it. That's mostly at this point in my life the only times I really write, when I feel like I have something I need to create order with, or just like get it out of here and put it somewhere else.
So what do you write? Like, are you writing like journals? Are you writing like blogs? Are you writing?
I either write, I journal, and I kind of live in essays right now, which I feel like which is why I loved hearing you say you write essays. I feel like it's like a very random, casual, I don't know, maybe it's my own perspective, but usually people write like poems. Like, you know what I mean? I definitely don't naturally write in that direction, but really it's like dead ass leveraging like how you write a paper from college, and like that type of organization is how I try and apply to my thoughts, and it turns into like very much a essay that you could turn into school. But yeah,
Love that.
Me too. This is so cute. Look at the
Leslie,
two
let-
essayists in my life interact.
Aw.
oh
Leslie, you next.
Okay, well, I think that the simplest way to describe it, when I'm actually writing in the way I like to write. So I'll use writing as a quick, easy way to remember certain thoughts that I want to explore more, for sure. But I think that honestly, in most mediums I enjoy, for some reason, it's most helpful for me to think of that medium in terms of another medium. And I say so for some reason, but I think I've actually recently kind of figured out why that is the case. So, for example, I like to think of writing in terms of painting. I like to think of painting in terms of writing. Those are two easy, obvious ones. And I think the reason is it makes me feel safer and more comforted to build in the fact that I know I'm translating, because for some reason it's important for me to hold that strongly. This theme that's come up so much this season, it's like when I'm making, I want to already know, and I don't force myself. That feels more natural. So like it feels more natural for me when I'm writing something I really care about. Like I'm trying to write in the way that feels true to me and not just as a quick, easy way to contain or something. It's like it feels more natural to be like, with these phrases, with these sounds, with the concepts, with how I can rouse your emotions, to build out the structure of the piece in terms of how I would think of color and how color affects you, and how you can put colors next to each other that vibrate certain ways, or one color will push out further in the picture plane. Like that's how I think of my writing. Whereas when I'm painting, and again, not quick images to capture thoughts in that way, but if I sit down and like, I'm going to paint in the way I most enjoy, I spend a lot of time mixing colors for the painting, but I'm thinking of the colors in terms of how thoughts interact in my mind and worded concepts. I'm like, if I put these three colors next to each other, it feels more true to me to how it feels when I have this logical breakdown of something. And so usually it's like the whole painting thing for me, like, is the process. It helps me think through things. And then it's like whatever the image is, often I think will carry resonances. Like people will go to those places I was logically thinking of, but it's usually not like the exact, and that isn't the point, right? Because the point was helping me think. And it's just like, I know the resonances will come through. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I write for the deadline.
That's so real.
So yeah, I write essays, which I guess we didn't even talk about what an essay is, but it's
Let's
like
do that.
yeah. What is an essay?
Gosh, it's all we talk about all day in this program is like what an essay is, and an essay doesn't even know what itself is. But I guess like Montaigne called the essay like a sally of the mind on the page.
So annoying.
So I know, yeah, but it's helpful. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that either. But yeah, so I guess for a long time I wrote poetry and I was like, oh yeah, like I'm a writer. But I didn't understand the line break at all. And like the poetry I wrote was just really bad. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll write fiction. And then the fiction I wrote was just so boring. It was just like two people in a room. It was really bad. And then I randomly took a nonfiction class. I was like, I don't even know what this is. What am I going to be writing? A science textbook? Like, that's so boring. I was like, but none of the other classes are open. So like, the class in my last semester, I shouldn't even have been in it. It was like an advanced creative nonfiction class, but my advisor, Dale, shout out to Dale, was like, Jessie, I can get you into this class. Just don't tell anyone that you haven't taken the prereq, especially the professor. And I was like, okay, I won't. So I got in there and I'm like, I don't even know what we're talking about. It was like a week late to class. And we were reading something which turned out to be like a book of nonfiction written by the director of the program I'm currently at, which is like strange. But anyway, I was like, what is this? It's just people talking on the page. And it's just like prose that's about the world.
You're getting me excited.
But it's not a
Even though you're saying it.
story. It's not a story.
Okay.
You can just say shit. Like you can just be like, I think this. And then you can tell a story. You can tell like an anecdote. You can tell stories about the world. You can use the tools of fiction. You can use the tools of poetry. But you're just trying to like figure something out. And you have all of these tools. And it's just such a permissive state to be in. But at the same time, like essays can be so bad so easily. I've also heard, maybe she was just saying this to make us feel better, but one of our instructors was like, yeah, I definitely think of essays as the hardest thing to write, because there is so much permission and you have to like create a logic, like you have to like create a rule of the game, or there has to be a hunger or like an energy driving you through an essay, and it's not plot, it's asking. It's like an essay needs to be trying to figure out the world. So not just a sally of the mind, but I guess for me, it's like touching the world, like making something of the world. And either like, are we interested in the way this particular mind is viewing the world? Like, is that what's carrying us through? Are we interested in the story that's being told? Like, that's something that can carry us through. Are we interested in the language? Is that carrying us through? So it can be like many things, but I don't know, there's just something really exciting to me about the essay. I guess I think of it as like an asymptote. I really like, you know what an asymptote is? It's like on a graph, an asymptote is a line that will get closer and closer and closer and closer to a certain point in a series of infinitely small half steps, but like never arrive at like touching the actual point. So it's like, if you're writing an essay, you're asking a question into the world. And you're trying and trying and trying, and like you have to believe that you will get there, and you just never will, because it's actually really hard to answer questions about the world. Yeah, it's like a radical
Jessie,
imagination.
Can I just interrupt you by reading something who said this way better than you did? Her name's Jessie Kraemer. She wrote her thoughts on essay. I'll just read real quick. She said, she just wrote this really good thing, just 2 paragraphs. She said, calling something nonfiction will make me immediately suspicious. If you go out of your way to tell me something is true, I'm going to assume you're lying. That antagonism is what I love about an essay. It's like a Lazzi. Am I saying that right?
A Lazzi?
Lazzi. The same failure every time. There is no capital T true. Everyone loves a Lazzi, and we keep reading essays because they're this awful analog for how we attempt to cohere narrative about our lives. It's a kinship with this pseudo-impossible project of understanding the world. Speculation is the currency of the essay, is any movement in the text, because if we only wrote confidently forward about what we knew to be true, there would be no essay. Some things are true, I wouldn't dispute that. But the way a mind holds a fact is a funny thing, and no two do it the same. A mind can hold real things in a really unreal way. All that's there are stars, and we see constellations. A trick you learn is that beginning anything with I imagine makes it nonfiction. The fact of writing the fiction was true, but putting the focus there changes things. Then we are watching you do it. She did a good job. Better than you.
True. She's a better writer
No, I'm just adding on to what you were saying. Yeah.
than speaker.
No, I love that. I don't think I had much of in my imagination this place for creative nonfiction writing. So just hearing you describe it, it gives me a better idea of what exactly you study and write, but I think
Yeah, and what
creates
you
some
should
new
be
surface
studying and writing.
area.
Vince is an essayist.
You're so
I don't know if I don't.
That's the conclusion of this episode. Yeah. Write him a recommendation letter, Jesse. Get him in. Get him in there.
Oh,
Come
shit.
to Iowa.
Oh shit.
Please no.
Okay.
I'll send you my essays for your feedback.
Yes, let's do that. Let's trade.
Just kidding. After Leslie was so brutal to you, I can only imagine how brutal you are with your editing as well. So I'm too intimidated.
It
Oh
serves you
no,
right,
ask any of my
motherfucker.
students. I just give them all A's. Okay,
Oh.
Kevin.
Wait, what did Kevin say?
Wait, I didn't hear what
Oh,
Kevin
because
said.
I used to give Vince my college papers in college. Now to be fair, I sounded like someone who didn't know like a literal non-native of the English language trying to write in the structure of an English language.
Evan was
Vince
actually
was
a
like-
great writer, but he gave no fucks about any rules that are set in place for
No
writing college
periods,
papers.
no-
So what I was editing was like, what the? There's literally no proper form, but it was beautiful writing. Like it was.
a run-on sentence.
Radical.
I used to, because I didn't know how
I
to.
can, I
write.
know exactly what you're talking about. I
didn't
know you.
how to fucking write. So I used to write papers the way I now write poetry, and I didn't get it. And I literally, someone in 10th or 11th grade had to teach me how to use periods and commas. And then it wasn't until my second or third year of college that a professor got up and said, all right, just the basic structure. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. And I was like, that makes so much fucking sense. And then he was like, the first sentence, and then in the style of what we're writing, he was like, the first sentence of each paragraph should tell you what's going to be in the paragraph. And like just that skeleton made so much sense. So if I spent 20 years of my life trying to write and being like, I don't know. And I would just write, and then Vince would send my paper back, and it would be fucking more red than white and black. And I would just be like, well, fuck me and my life. Like, I'm not getting into that master's degree I tried to like apply for because Vince told me to like go home and pack it up. So, yeah, so I would love to see, Jesse, you criticize. And if it's like a lot of red, please like CC me on the email so I can like laugh at Vince and like shit on him for how much he made me feel like a fucking idiot. Rightfully so.
But didn't you say you became a better writer through his comments?
Nah, it wasn't
No?
through his comments because like Vince would
Oh.
laugh at me and I got so insecure and so like I couldn't hear anything through the laughter that I just like kind of shamefully walked away. And it wasn't until that one professor said the skeleton of how to write, and I was like, it just all clicked, and I was like, holy shit, I get it. And I would then begin to write in that format. But yeah. So if you
Something I
criticize-
heard the other day is someone say the best advice I ever got was someone telling me I was good. Like the best writing advice I ever got was someone telling me I was good. And I'm like, sometimes all you need is encouragement.
Vince, fucking Vince and Leslie, maybe if you encourage me a little bit, I know how to write a
Here we
college paper. I could write a
go.
college paper if Leslie would just lift me up and
Wait, but Kevin, what are your thoughts on how, when, why you write? Which I know, Jesse, sorry, I probably shouldn't have interrupted you because you didn't end up, you were just talking about
about to
essay, but we
say.
can circle back.
No, I
if
would've
you
gone
want,
off of
'cause
it.
I
No,
wanna-
no.
We cut my girl Jessie off. Like, damn, she's the guest on this episode. Like, what do we?
You're so
He-
right.
He listened to us like 12 hours.
I'm nervous, so I'm doing a bad
We
job.
talk for like 82
You're
hours.
nervous.
We get like when, how, why? When in the mornings, because I can get into a different spiritual state. How, like when I say spiritual, I don't mean like the godly thing. I literally, when I'm not joking and I'm not speaking figuratively when I say there is an entity and a spirit inside of me. Anyway, that's the when I write in the morning because my that's that entity thing, that little critter thing, whatever it is most active. That thing is most active in the mornings because I genuinely believe that for wherever you're in, if you're up at a time when nobody else is up, literally the physical atmosphere is quieter. And so then my thing has more
fidelity to speak through the physical into my mind because it's quieter outside and there's not as much trying to fight for my attention. That's the when in the mornings. How literally that thing has something to say, why, or how that kind of like Leslie, Jessie was saying when she goes to like write, certain words have certain sounds. And so that's what my little entity does. It doesn't really actually pick words for the meaning of the word. It'll pick the word for the sake of the sound it creates, because I like sonically the sound it creates, and kind of like people who have synesthesia who will say sounds have colors. So my entity will pick words, and I don't have synesthesia, but I know that it's picking words based on the color the portrait that it's painting. So it'll pick the words for the sound because it associates with the color, and then it'll paint a portrait. And then why? Because literally, like if I don't end up writing the poem, it's literally like, all right, hold your breath and just don't fucking like, don't take a breath. That's what it feels like, holding my, trying to like, all right, try to hold your breath. But the other problem with that thing is if I actually oppress my thing, then literally every time I don't write, it's like holding my breath till I pass out, and it's only gonna like incur like mental concussion and mental like deprivation of that facility. And so that's the when, how, why. In the morning, how, by that facility, that little thing, and then why, because like if I don't, it's gonna lead to horrible mental ramifications down the line that I've seen when I chose to not write for like 2-3 years.
Yeah, I love the analogy of it to breathing.
Yeah, I mean that's how every creative feels, right? Like if you're a creative, like anything, like cooking, drawing, painting, whatever, like sport, if you're a gymnast, if you move, dance, like and then you tell a creative, hey, like no medium, no faucet, no outlet, like they'll like a year, 2 year, 3 years, it's like, oh no, like no, you can still make money, you can still have a job, you can still have a house, you can still eat, you can still go to the bathroom, you can still walk outside, you're not confined, but you can't create, you can't ideate in the medium of whatever your creative facility. It's like, fam, like that person will like, I genuinely believe you could like fucking create like mental, like legitimate mental instability and mental health issues in a person like that.
Yeah, I had the experience the other day of being like, why do I feel so bad? And then I was like, whoa, I haven't drawn in a really long time. And then I just like spent time drawing, and it was so cleansing. And Leslie, I was thinking about this. You were saying when you paint, you're thinking in words, and when you write, you're thinking in pictures. I definitely do the same thing. There's like this paralleling or like companion element. Like when I'm drawing, my inner monologue is like narrativizing the line. It's like, oh yeah, this line wants to get really close to like this circle because like it's like, and then it goes further away because it's like scared, and it's like these strange stories that maybe don't even make sense. They're just like notions. But also, I don't know, something you said, Kevin.
The first time you talked about that was when we took our road trip to Canada. You were drawing on a yellow legal pad and you described it, and that's the first time you put words on that. That's so sweet to remember. Sorry, go ahead.
I love you.
I love you too.
We got it in. Okay, so we got the I love you. I guess I was thinking about like, Kevin, you said taking creatives away from their creation can cause like a deadening, but also giving creation to people who have not been empowered to create or have not conceived of themselves as creators can create healing. Not to overstate that, or like another avenue or tool for like self-knowledge and like safety. And I see that in I teach a gen ed literature class, and really a lot of what I teach is creative writing, and it's just like these first, second, or third year like undergraduates who are like business majors and like sports medicine majors or like pre-med, and a lot of them haven't read books in years and haven't written in a long time. And then we do a lot of free writing, or I just get them to journal their thoughts, or I get them to write fiction or essays. And there is, man, it's almost like because they don't conceive of themselves as artists, and then you give them this tool that they have not felt was theirs before, and they like realize they have this faculty, it is incredible. It is overwhelming. And they also don't have the pressure of it being like, oh, this has to be good. Like no one's going to judge this. It's not like they're inside of like art the art institution. It's like they're just creating in such a pure way. And I'll have students be like, yeah, I have been journaling every day because of this class. And like, I brought this, like it led to revelations in therapy. Like I've started writing poetry again, like just for me, or I'm changing my major because I realized writing is something I can do. And just, getting someone to write and then saying unequivocally, like, yeah, you are a writer, like this is yours, like your words are your own, and more than just your words, like your creation is your own. And like you exist in a way that you didn't know you existed. Like you can fill this space and you can move in these ways. It's really exciting and like affirming, not only of them, but of like the whole, it's like life affirming to go through that every semester. Yeah, because really, I don't know, maybe because of the institution, or I don't know, but there's like a lot of shame or like judgment around creating that I think just needs to get out of the way. Not that, that was confusing, right? Because I have preferences and do think there's such a thing as like good and bad writing contextually. But it's like a damn shame that more people don't feel empowered to create. And I say that as someone who I feel like in many ways, even as an artist, like I've probably, I don't know how long it took for me to even conceive of myself as an artist.
Shit.
Maybe not even until like a year or two ago. And it was just because people in my life, like Leslie, were like, yeah, like you're an artist, like you're a writer. And I was like, no, I write sometimes, or like I make art sometimes, but I don't really feel like that's mine to claim. But I feel like that's anyone's to claim, you know, like you don't have to have written anything to be a writer. Like I was an artist before I made anything. And it's like, you don't need to do anything to have access to that part of self. And it is like, it is a part of self. Like it is a part of the human to create.
Agree. I think there's good and bad art, blah, 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 context and personal taste. But also, well, do I think there's good and bad art? TBD.
I think it's
But
irrelevant.
like there's, it's like so stupid to think like someone who's never drawn and maybe is deep in the weeds of like maybe a lawyer. It's so stupid to think that if they draw something, it's not like just as valuable as someone who studied drawing. It's so stupid. It's like, okay, you've had different training, you have different proclivities for how to process and communicate. It's beautifully fascinating to see how someone who doesn't have that natural proclivity or the training chooses to draw a line. Like it's just as valuable to understanding and having a relationship with humans.
It's just a different type of thing.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, I don't know. There's like this hierarchy that's not necessary. And yeah, we can talk about the kinds of art that we want to like publish or have be a part of the culture. There's like, I don't know. And like, how does that happen? And it's not like we decide the best song gets disseminated. It's like, yeah, it's not like the popular song is the best song. It's like everyone listens to the song and it's our common context and it's like what we can talk about and it becomes like a cultural thing. So its value is that we've all heard it and then we can talk about it. It's not that it's necessarily the best, which is something I was thinking about. It's not that there are rules for why anything becomes culturally relevant. The power and the value is that it's something we have in common.
That's something I've been thinking about with listening to a bit more like, I guess, top hits or whatever lately, which I used to not, and honestly was probably pretty immature and snobby about.
We love a hipster edgelord.
Definitely were snobby. You were absolutely very snobby.
Did all know me when I was quite a bit more snobby.
Pinky out, nose up, like.
And honestly, like not even a snob with that great of taste, to be honest. So anyway, like
I don't think you're actually.
No, you have good.
It's okay to be a snob. Why are we judging snobs?
Oh,
like
yeah.
let's get on the meta level.
Snobs' lives matter. Never mind.
but back to what we were talking about with the way COVID has changed things and when we're forced to just more so lately communicate with words. I've been thinking about, and even with me getting back into Instagram, which I talked about at the beginning of season 1, and seeing how, oh my God, like I truly did used to think like people who like to post on their stories and post a lot in their feeds and all that. I truly did at its basic. I wouldn't say it this way, but really looking back, I was like, those people are just a little more shallow and like they care a little bit more about attention and they care da 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 da. And it's like, first off, not true for everyone who uses Instagram that way. Second off, wanting attention doesn't make someone shallow. And third, liking popular songs also doesn't mean you don't have good taste. It maybe just means you value different things about music, which one of the things could be you value the fact that everyone else is listening to this right now. And you're tapping into something that, whether it's because there were market forces, whether it's because people genuinely like it, whatever reason, you enjoy feeling like a part of something a lot of other people are enjoying. And that's not like less valid than liking something because you so relate to it and it's so well made, and like, you know, which I do feel like I wouldn't have admitted it, but I used to frame things that way. So yeah, to the topic of being on the same
take
page.
note, motherfucker. Take note.
Take note of what?
Leslie's preaching to you.
What? I'm preaching to me.
Define. What you mean?
Is there a problem?
We only
Is
have
there a
Jessie.
problem?
Hey,
What's
we
the
have
problem?
Jessie.
Is there a problem? No.
both of y'all
Is there
are
a
gonna
problem?
Give Jessie the last 2 minutes. God damn it. I swear to God. We
What the
talked
heck? I don't even
7 fucking hours and we finally have the second of only 2 guests.
Kevin
we've
better
had.
try and take shots and then talk his way out of having to explain it. Go ahead, Jesse. Kevin doesn't want the smoke.
Go
What
ahead,
are we
Jess.
talking about?
So when Jessie exits out, I'm gonna light your ass up. Wait till she exits out.
What are we talking
I don't know.
about? Oh,
Man,
about
We didn't get
writing?
to editing.
editing? Oh, F editing.
Okay.
Hey.
That's not even something I'm good at. I don't know. I think everyone should write. I don't know where all this judgment is coming from. Like, get rid of judgment and write. And then afterwards, I guess you edit. And then you can talk about like what you want to do with the writing. And then certain kinds of judgments can come in. Judgment is important, but I think it should be consciously deployed. I don't know. I feel like when people stop themselves before they begin something.
If someone doesn't write ever and they're listening to this, what's the good starting place? Is it just to stream
That's
a
a good-
conscious journal or like what?
Yeah, I'd say a good way to begin writing is to just set like a span of time, like 10 or 15 minutes, and just start writing. Oh, a good way is to like just find a poem, like read a poem, read the poem aloud, read the whole poem, take the first line of the poem, write it down, and then just continue on, like continue the thought, and don't let yourself stop writing for like 10 or 15 minutes. I think in terms, it's kind of funny because like what you didn't write will always be worse than the bad thing you did write. And I feel like, oh my gosh.
What do you mean it will be worse?
The great essay you didn't write will be worse than the bad essay you did write. Like if you don't write something, it doesn't
Worse as in
exist.
it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, worse as in it just doesn't exist.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
So like if you keep stopping yourself out of the gate, nothing's gonna happen. But I just will say it is really interesting to be in community with like dozens of writers who have been validated literally by the institution and like by their peers and like just like generally who still get to the page or the computer and are like, God, I can't write today, like this is gonna be really bad, like this sucks, like it's just the same, it's like all the way down, like I don't like, that's a problem that everyone has, but like a way for either someone who hasn't written or someone who's been writing forever, is just to focus on generation, like generative writing. So like setting time and just being like, okay, I'm not going to stop, like not editing while you write, just like writing, generating content not even necessarily quantity, but just like attention spent generating, as opposed to quality. I think quality should be assessed much later.
In the editing phase.
In the editing phase, which is just a different thing entirely.
Tune in next time for editing.
Oh man.
To any listener that's actually made it to the end, send us your writing.
That long of a one?
Send us your writing.
No, don't send Vince your writing. If dear God, if you value your life and mental health, do not send Vince your
Send us your writing. I want to see.
Yeah, Vince, then you can read the writing and then you can just give encouragement and you'll be like making Pulitzer Prize winners, because sometimes the only
Vince
advice
is
someone
great at
needs.
encouragement.
This was really fun.
This was really fun. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for allowing me into this space.
I think we've been fiending for you to come on since like before we started doing this. So it's been a long time coming.
Man.
This is probably one of my. I'm trying to think. This is top 2 favorite episodes that we've done, season 1 and season 2.
And we're gonna leave the other one unnamed. So
well, that's the thing.
Leslie's friends.
I'm trying to debate I'm trying to pull from my memory which one might be, but I'm saying top 2 to leave the possibility of one that I might have enjoyed more. But in terms of what we've actually put out, this actually top 2, but actually probably is one of like what we've, because like, and Leslie and Vince talked for a long time about like, man, we really want to cater to like some of the interests you have. And some of the things you're more passionate about, because we understand that in the topic selection, even if you do come up with something, just the way we might steer the conversation, it might not always lean towards you, or it might not always lean towards your interests or proclivities. And so I didn't realize, I know what the prompt was from Leslie, but like once we were probably like 15 minutes into the conversation, just hearing you talk and hearing how you break down things, it's like for example, I speak Arabic and I speak a very specific kind of Arabic. There's a part of that world that I can go there and I can speak to those people. But if I go to Iraq, if I go to Morocco, if I go to Saudi Arabia, I might not necessarily be able to communicate with those people. So a lot of this podcast, a lot of the times feels like I'm in those regions where there's a loss of fidelity or a loss of clarity a lot of times, or just not a closeness of tribalness. And so hearing you talk, it felt like I got transported to that region for a second. And it was like, oh shit, like these are my, like someone who's a writer, like this, like there wasn't a time where you were saying something and I was like, no, it was like, no, it always felt like, damn, it feels like she's speaking my dialect, or my, like the colloquialism of my people and my tribal people. I feel like I'm home, like around a fire with my people, and they're orating and telling stories of our tribes and so it just felt really, really good of like, oh, my soul feels like refreshed and like encouraged and vitalized, just because like to have such a kindred spirit over writing is like probably my top thing. So yeah, this is probably like top episode for me.
God, that's beautiful. Yeah, the way you are,
Jessie, you're in the pod. Okay. I'm out.
See ya.
No, we can.
Let's do the debrief.
Whoa.
That's right.
Let's talk about how this went. What's our next episode? Okay. Yeah, you guys are all beautiful.
No, thank you, Jessie. You're beautiful. Thank you.
Love you guys.
Coming on.
Love.
See ya.
Wait, you have to stay on for a second. Thank you for listening to the Bottomless Podcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Music. And we hope you'll tune in next time. And we do hope that you will send us your writing. DM us at Bottomless Podcast on Insta. Peace.
Bye.
Bottomless.